Perfect.
Butter.
Alan.
I gotta. I'm going home.
This week's guest is Courtney with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Thank you so much for making it out today. We're here to talk about chronic wasting disease, right?
Yes, chronic wasting disease.
Okay, great. And now, your position with the Game Commission is, or was, or now, or
Yeah, basically.
Transitioning to.
Basically, for the past 2 years, I've worked as the chronic wasting disease communication specialist for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Here just recently, I've moved forward into working more on general communications for the Game Commission.
Okay. That's really cool. So now you spent your last 2 years heavily focused on chronic wasting disease, though.
Yes, I was basically hired to help with outreach and spread public awareness of chronic wasting disease across the state.
Okay. So what did like the day-to-day of that kind of consist of?
So it really depends on what time of year it is, but I'm creating key messages for the Game Commission to put out about chronic wasting disease. A large part of my job is actually just staying up to date on research and the things that we know about it, the things we don't know about it, what we're trying to learn about it, and then taking all of that information and explaining to the public what's going on and what are we doing to manage it. So I did, over the past year, probably over 32 public programs. I've done podcasts. I've talked on news stations, radio stations, just communicating.
That's awesome. So, like, I'm going to be honest. Like, I don't hunt. I don't deal with deer or wildlife very often. I live in the city. So, like, I don't even know what chronic wasting disease is. I mean, not to say, like, I know a little bit. I mean, with why we were having you on. But, like, as far as like anyone else goes, like I'm just like the general public. So like if I were to be at like one of these events and you were talking, like how would you explain it to me, or like why should I care about it?
So I would explain it the same to everybody. Typically, most people care about wildlife for a variety of different reasons. Whether you're a hunter, you can just be a wildlife fanatic. Like, you can just love wildlife. Do you like seeing deer? Do you like seeing turkey, bear? I mean,
yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, right?
I love animals.
So, nature is something that we as people naturally are like attuned to. We want nature around us. We want to see it. It is something that calms us. It's something that just makes us feel better day to day. There's tons of studies out there that show that, especially with children, if they're exposed to nature and they're in the outdoors, just playing in the outdoors when they're younger, it can make them more physically able, I should say. You know, they're stronger, faster, more agile, and it also can help them with test scores. It can help make them smarter. Just nature in general is something that is good for people's health.
Absolutely.
So whether you're a hunter or not, being concerned about our deer population is something that can affect everybody.
Now,
wow.
Yeah,
that was a really well-rounded answer.
Yeah.
I was not expecting that, but that was awesome.
That was amazing.
I used to teach kids, so environmental educator.
They're both children.
Both, yeah, exactly. You're still teaching kids. Come on, you're sitting here with us. So can you explain to us and any of our viewers what exactly is chronic wasting disease? Like, what is the threat? How does it affect the deer population? And what's like the main scare of it? Like, what's the end game?
Okay, so I'm gonna do this first in the most simplest terms ever.
Okay.
Because if I get into the really big complexities of it, you're gonna miss the big point. Okay. So, chronic wasting disease is basically a brain disease that affects members of the deer family. It is always fatal, and there's no cure or vaccine.
Always fatal.
Always fatal.
So once they get it, they're done.
Yeah, I mean,
like getting bit by a zombie.
They have an incubation period of 18 to 24 months, so it takes a while, but yes, they will die. We have not had an instance yet where a deer has come in contact with chronic wasting disease or has become infected with it where they survive. Could it potentially be out there out of the billions of deer we have in the United States? Yes, maybe, but we haven't seen it yet. So that's the big thing you need to know. If you want to get more into the complexities of it, it is a disease that's very closely related to mad cow disease.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask. Like, what are the symptoms that you can be like, oh, snap, like that deer has chronic wasting disease? Like, is there telltale symptoms? Like, is there telltale signs that you can see?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So no, because it does take 18 to 24 months for an infected individual to start showing symptoms.
Okay.
Wow.
So you can have a perfectly healthy looking deer. I mean, like massive, beautiful buck, right? And it can be infected with chronic wasting disease.
And it won't show signs.
And it won't show.
Up to 2 years later.
Right. And
Wow.
then once they start to show symptoms, though, they will kind of start to deteriorate, so to speak, pretty quickly. So you're going to see things like a lower head and ears. You're going to see excessive drooling. That's a pretty big sign.
Okay.
They're very thirsty, excessive urination, thinning or wasting. That's where that title that comes into with the title of it. So they're getting very thin. But a lot of things that people report is often behavioral problems. So they often have a lack of fear of humans.
Oh.
So we have people who report, they can basically like come up between me and you like a foot away, and the deer has no fear in it. It's just standing there, almost like the person's not even there.
Oh my God.
Weird. Okay.
Yeah, they stumbling issues, and some people report they walk in circles.
Oh.
Like they're lost.
Just
Weird.
so it attacks their brain. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially it turns their brain into a sponge.
Okay.
So chronic wasting disease, mad cow disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, which is a human version of the disease.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, what?
Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease?
Where did that name come from?
Germany.
The
for
guys who found it originally.
Oh.
It's their names.
And it's in humans.
Yes, there is a lot of different versions of this disease in different species.
Okay.
So
but it's essentially the same disease. It's just they're specific to the species.
yes, they're typically specific to the species. I will say, like mad cow disease, for instance, whenever we first detected mad cow disease, we believed that it couldn't be transferred to humans, and then we found out in 1996 we were wrong about that.
Oh, and it can be.
Yes.
I never knew that either.
Yeah, so that was actually in Europe, and mad cow disease, when it is actually found in humans, is called Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease variant. Just fun fact. But it can. So that's some I shouldn't say issues. That's some of the concern with chronic wasting disease with our hunters is a lot of our hunters are concerned that there might be a possibility that if you eat meat from a CWD infected individual that you might be able to come infected with it.
That was actually going to be my next question was,
Yeah.
is there, as far as we know, can it be transferred to humans?
No, not yet. So I always say yet because
Yes.
just like with mad cow disease, we were pretty sure it couldn't, and then we found out it could. However, how should I say this? Chronic wasting disease was first detected in 1967. It was found in a captive research facility in Colorado, and since then, we have not found any known cases of chronic wasting disease infecting humans. So it's been over 50 years. We haven't found a single case.
That's a pretty big like testing and studying period for sure.
Now, with that being said, we also this disease is so complex. We also didn't know what caused chronic wasting disease until 1982.
Oh, wow.
So we knew there was this disease. It had something to do that was affecting the brains of these animals, and they all had similar symptoms, but we didn't really truly know what caused it. It wasn't until later in 1982 that we figured out that it was a protein.
Now, is there any sign of it like mutating and like growing into something stronger where like, kind of like the common cold or the flu, it mutates itself every year into like a different strain, and then that's why there's a new flu shot every year.
So
maybe not the common cold, but the flu.
So just to chronic wasting disease, mad cow disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, all these other scrapie, all these what we call TSC disease. The formal name of it is transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. So these diseases are known for being caused by a protein that are known as prions. Pretty much all mammals have prions in your body. You have prions, I have prions. Okay. These proteins, we don't know the exact function of them yet, but we believe that they do good things for the body.
Okay.
However, something happens that causes this protein to misform, to take on a different shape. When it takes on this different shape, it changes the function of the protein.
Okay.
And it starts to create holes to form in the brain. It's a pretty simplified way of explaining it, but it starts to create holes to form.
Microscopic Swiss cheese.
Right. So the fact that the protein, the main difference that's non-disease causing and disease causing is just the shape of a singular protein, means that there could definitely be a potential that if that protein misforms just a slightly different way, that you could be dealing with now a protein that is now able to infect other animals. We haven't really seen that, so I don't want to like scare people and say anything like that. But just like viruses, things like that, we do know there are multiple different strains of prions. So it's not something that I want to say is like impossible. So far, though. And this is the same with a lot of diseases, is that typically diseases kind of specialize themselves for a certain species, and they tend to not jump species barriers, too much.
Okay.
Gotcha. So now let me just back this up real quick to make sure I'm right. So a prion is a protein.
Yep, just a protein.
And it's in everybody's body.
Yep, mammals mostly.
Okay, mostly mammals. So, all right. So... where was I going with that? So,
it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so,
and this is why it's so hard to manage.
Is that why there's like a human version of the whatever German-sounding version of?
Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease.
Is that because of prions? And
yep, everything we believe are all caused by this misfolded protein.
Wow.
And it will be slightly different for all of these different species.
If it's caused because of these prions or the proteins that we think do good for the body, but it is also at the same time showing that these are kind of causing, not necessarily causing, but like they're part of the reason for these diseases. Why do we think that they're good for the body rather than maybe bad?
Because we do, like I said, we do see prions in mammals on a typical basis. If we all have prions right now in our body, and it doesn't seem to be affecting us, right? So we don't have reason to believe otherwise, but we do notice that typically when you see symptoms, when you start seeing these negative side effects, that's when you also see the misfolded version of the prion or the protein associated with it. So it's kind of like a correlation type thing. So you start having these symptoms, we see misfolded proteins.
So you're really riding the fine line of just because there's correlation doesn't mean there's causation.
Right. And there's still a lot of people out there who don't, I shouldn't say a lot, a small subsection of people who believe that these diseases are not caused by proteins. They still firmly believe it could be a virus or a bacteria. Okay. But I'm going to say this is just me. I'm going to say probably like 95% of the scientific community believes it is misfolded proteins. Okay. And there's tons of research out there on it. I mean, tons.
No. That was going to be my next question.
And speaking of research, so if I'm not mistaken, it got to Pennsylvania in 2012, correct? And started in Adams County.
Yes.
Which is where me and Hunter grew up, actually. So since 2012, how many reported cases have there been? Do you know off the top of your head, or a rough idea?
Yes, I'm trying to do math right now. So let me put it this way. I'm kind of like a speaking robot at the moment with these numbers. I get asked so often. But so basically here's the history summed up in probably like 2 minutes. So we first detected chronic wasting disease in a captive deer facility in Adams County in 2012. Shortly after, a couple months after, we found 3 wild positives in Bedford and Blair County. Okay.
They're not necessarily close to each other either. Well, like Adams and Bedford and Blair, they're not.
No, we don't think there's a correlation between the Adams County captive deer facility and the wild positives found in Bedford and Blair. Okay. But to be quite honest, we had chronic wasting disease knocking at our southern border already in the wild populations at the state south of us. So most likely those positives we found in Bedford and Blair County probably just walked into our state. Gotcha. Deer don't know boundary lines.
That's true.
They don't see them.
Adams also, neighbors, well, like goes right up against Maryland as well. Yeah, because like Gettysburg and Frederick are, well, geography isn't important, but yeah. So probably more than likely just walked into Pennsylvania. Yeah.
So we had those. No, I can't report on all the captive positives that we found because the captive deer facility is managed by the Department of Agriculture, not the Pennsylvania Game Commission. So we know about the positives and things like that, but we don't have any authority over them. We don't manage any captive facilities. So we primarily work with wild animals, so wild deer. And we had those 3 wild positives in 2012, 2 in 2013, 5 in 2014, 12 in 2015, 25 in 2016, 79 in 2017, 123 in 2018. And so far, from what we have looked at for 2019, we found 199.
Oh my God! So it's
just growing astronomically.
It's definitely growing.
It's almost doubling every year. Well, not almost doubling.
But it's definitely growing. It's not going down, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So it is increasing, and the one thing that we see is that the number of deer that test positive every year increases, and the geographic spread increases. So we started out with these much smaller, what we call disease management areas. So when a new positive is found, we create a 10-mile buffer around that positive. It's now a disease management area. We have specific regulations in that area to help prevent the spread of CWD. Okay. We started out with 2 very small disease management areas. Our disease management areas now currently encompass over 8,000 square miles in the state.
Oh my God.
Wow.
So it is spreading. I will say we get the comment a lot from people that just because the number of positives increases, number of deer, I say, that test positive increases every year, doesn't necessarily mean that it's increasing in the state. And they do make a very good point because we are testing more deer every year.
Okay.
So they're saying you're only finding more positives because you're testing more deer. However, that's why you do percentages.
Yes.
Because it's a comparable number. Percent literally means per 100.
Yes.
So the one thing that we do notice is in the Bedford, Blair, Fulton County area, where the majority of our positives are coming out of every year, the infection rate, which is a percentage, we represent that as a percentage, is increasing every year.
Okay.
So I do hear that, and I typically like to address that because I don't want people thinking that, the only reason we're finding more is because we're testing more.
Mm-hmm.
It is increasing, especially in the core area where we originally found it.
So my next question, based on the containment areas, the disease containment areas. Okay, so first off, how does it spread from deer to deer?
So it can spread through direct deer-to-deer contact, so touching anything like that, and then it can also be spread through prion-contaminated environments.
Okay.
So the prions, the proteins, are actually shed in the deer's saliva, urine, and feces.
Okay.
And once it is in the soil, in the ground, it is believed that it can last there for several years.
Several
Wow.
years.
Yeah.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question then. So let's say we test all these deer, right? They all test positive. And now this is my, civilian side, like non-hunter side. Why do we not just shoot them?
So that would be like that's a typical disease management standpoint. We actually have, or I should say we just closed. We had a draft CWD response plan out in the past 6 months that was open for public comment. And the main purpose or the aim that we were trying to get to with this response plan is to increase hunter harvest and hunter opportunities so that we can reduce deer populations in the areas where CWD is found.
Okay.
So that the disease will spread at a slower rate, if we cannot get rid of it in those areas. I will tell you that it is almost near impossible to get rid of CWD.
Oh,
we will probably always be dealing with it, but we
just
can
about to
slow
ask
it.
you that.
Slowing it is really our goal.
Now, is it immediately detectable? Like, if they contract it day one,
No, so it's kind of like an accumulation factor. There's a lot of things we do know about CWD. A lot of things. We've learned a lot in 50 years. But there's also still some things we don't know. That would be very beneficial if we did. And people are trying to figure it out. Scientists are trying to figure it out, especially because we do have versions of this in humans. There are people who are spending a lot of time trying to figure it out. It's just science takes time, and we've known about viruses and bacteria for how long, and they still stump us, right, on certain things. We've only learned about this in the 80s. So we're really, if you want to think about it, in the very juvenile stages of learning about this type of disease. And so with this disease, we believe it's accumulation factor. So we don't actually know what the infectious dose is for a deer yet. So we don't know how many, what exposure it takes to prions for the deer to become infected. We don't know whether if they come in contact with just one prion, are they now infected, or does it take 100,000 prions for them to be infected? We assume it's more than less. That would make common sense. But you know what they say about assuming things. So we assume it's more, but we don't really know. And the other thing is that how the prion, I'm trying to think of how to easily say this. So you'll have a prion that misfolds, or a protein that misfolds. We'll say proteins is easier for people to think about. So you have a protein that misfolds. And basically what it does is it kind of convinces the proteins around it to mimic its shape.
Okay.
So in the brain. So it is going to start spreading from there. Okay, so it can take time for those symptoms and everything else to start to show up in the body. That's probably why the incubation period is 18 to 24 months. Okay. So with testing, the thing is, if a deer is newly infected and there's not very many proteins that are misfolded, we may miss that when trying to test it. Another very important key factor that makes this difficult to manage and that the general public should know is there is currently not a USDA approved live test.
Oh.
Wow, okay.
They are working on live tests. We have a lot of really good live tests that are like up and coming. Like RT Quick and some other things are up and coming. So it's on the way.
But they just have not passed the USDA regulations.
Yes, they're just not sensitive or specific enough yet for that. So right now, the way that we test deer, it has to be a post-mortem test. And that is because we have to remove either the obex, so that's the brainstem, or the lymph nodes that are in the head of the deer.
So wow, you can only test for it after they're dead. Yes,
and that's why hunting is so important to this and monitoring this disease, because we need those samples.
Yeah. So that was why my question, because I didn't actually know how you guys did the testing. So that was my question. I was assuming you guys were doing tests on these live deer, and you're like, oh, yeah, it's positive. And it's like, all right, see you later, Bambi. Like, that's why my question was like, why are we not just shooting them? Like, yep. Test positive.
So that's part of it. That's part of it. So, the live testing methods, we started being able to use them, and they're beneficial for like research. It could be very valuable in captive facilities for them to do regular testing. Things like that would be great. But in all honesty, having a live test may not be that applicable for a wild population too. Because if you think about it, if you want to live test a deer, that means you have to find the deer, capture the deer, keep it calm, get it tested, release it. That takes a lot of time and resources.
Money, yeah.
And we have a lot of deer in the state.
Now, speaking of all this testing and stuff, is it just the PA Game Commission doing the tests, or are there other government organizations working on this? Or
it's actually
I guess state by state PA Game Commission.
So the Pennsylvania Game Commission is responsible for wild mammals and birds in the states of Pennsylvania. So we are the primary organization that manages chronic wasting disease in the wild population in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture handles chronic wasting disease in captive deer industry. So like deer farms, hunting preserves, things like that. That's under the Department of Agriculture. The kind of over-ranking agency, USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture, then makes minimum standards for the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture to manage deer farms and those facilities in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, the Pennsylvania Game Commission we use research from other states. We consult other states and other state wildlife agencies to kind of determine what management actions we'll be doing in the state of Pennsylvania.
Wow. So, and from what I understand as well, the PA Game Commission isn't taxpayer funded. Is that correct? Or
yeah. So the Pennsylvania Game Commission does not receive state tax dollars. So we primarily receive funding from what is known as Pittman-Robertson funds. So that is an excise federal tax on the sales of guns and ammunition.
okay.
And that is federal, so it's broken up.
So I imagine like deer tag and stuff like that. That also goes towards the.
Yes.
Okay.
Hunting licenses are a big funding or a big revenue source for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and then also any other revenues that we make off of like oil and gas sales off of our state game lands that can also contribute to.
Wow. Okay.
That's pretty interesting.
Timber sales, things like that we can contribute to. Management and wildlife.
Wow, yeah.
Okay, yeah. See, and I would have like as the average person that doesn't hunt, like I would have never known that you guys weren't like taxpayer funded or anything like that. You know, I just imagined all just kind of went into a pool and was divvied out to everybody.
Oh yeah, especially if you hear like Pennsylvania.
Yeah, as soon as it's in the name,
you're like, oh, it's state taxpayer funded.
Exactly. Now, and you guys have gotten some pushback on this, from what I understand as well.
Yeah. So kind of as we were talking about earlier, how should I say this? Pennsylvania is actually probably the second top state for hunting in the nation.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So in the National Deer Alliance's, I believe, deer report, they reported that Pennsylvania hunters on average take 5.5 does per square mile and 3.3 buck per square mile. That's amazing. That's basically the main state that we fall under is Texas, and that's the same thing for hunting license sales. So we're like the number 2 top seller for hunting license sales, and that's under Texas. Wow. So we're really big.
Because if you look at the size of the states in comparison, Texas is much larger than us. So for us to be second to Texas.
Well, it might be a percentage thing too, like of the population. Is that how it works?
It's just the number that we sell.
Oh, so it's just wow. Oh my God.
Yeah. Like compared to Texas, like that's insane.
We're the northern Texas.
Yeah, we are. Welcome to Princeton.
We're about, I believe, and I wouldn't quote me specifically on this number, but if I remember, I think this last year we were about 800,000 hunters in the state of Pennsylvania who buy licenses.
Oh wow.
So hunting is like ingrained in Pennsylvania culture.
Oh yeah.
It's like a part of who we are. And deer hunting specifically is the most popular type of hunting, not only in our state, but honestly nationally. Deer hunting is what most people start out with, and they have a very personal connection to deer hunting. It relates them, or they think about family. They think about hanging out with friends. It's something that's passed down. Mm-hmm. It's something it's a tradition. And so when we talk about deer management in the aspect of a disease, and we start talking about we need to reduce deer numbers in an area, that's not something that I'm a hunter. I've been hunting since I was 15, 16 years old. Mm-hmm. I learned from my father. Same thing. It's a tradition. It's something that was passed down to me. And personally, I understand how our hunters feel whenever we talk about reducing deer numbers, because you're thinking in your head, man, I haven't been seeing very many deer anyway. Now you're talking about having less. This isn't going to make hunting enjoyable anymore. What am I going to do? How am I going to teach my kids how to hunt if there's no deer out there? Mm-hmm. It's the initial reaction, and I understand that reaction. But unfortunately, deer management for a hunting perspective is different than deer management for a disease perspective.
Oh, for sure.
And from a disease perspective, right now, since we don't have a cure or vaccine, the best thing we can do is lower deer populations in these areas so that the disease spreads at a slower rate. Mm-hmm. Because if a cure or vaccine is found, let's say 5-10 years from now, it's only going to benefit us in the long run if we have less deer to treat and if they're covering a smaller amount of surface area.
Yeah.
Wow. So now for the cures and vaccines, who's developing those? Or who's at least working on it? Do you know? Or
Yes.
Sorry, I had to ask you right as you.
No, you're good. So, the big one that stands out in everybody's mind, and that no, but I like that's the first time I heard that one. I like that. The one that typically stands out in the general public's mind is research that is done by Dr. Frank Bastian. He has been working on TSC diseases, so prion-related diseases, since the 70s. And it was in the late 70s, I believe, that he proposed that TSC-like diseases could potentially be caused by a spiroplasma bacteria, so a bacteria. And he's kind of stuck with that. He's continued his research. He's been doing it for years. And here recently, he came out and announced that he knows what causes CWD, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, and his argument is basically that what's causing these proteins to misform is a bacteria, same thing that he was proposing in the late 70s, and that he can come up with a cure.
He thinks he can come up with a cure.
He does think he can. And one of the things that I will say, and I can tell you this is for anybody in the Game Commission, because all we want is a solution to this problem.
Absolutely.
Trust me, we don't want to go and tell our hunters we have to reduce deer populations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we don't want to do that. That is a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we don't want to do that. We do want a better solution to this problem. And one of the things that is an issue, one of the reasons why we're not kind of jumping on board, is that so far, though, nobody's been able to replicate his work. So in science, to build credibility, other scientists have to be able to reproduce your work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of part of the reason why we haven't jumped fully on board on that, and why a lot of state wildlife agencies and other researchers haven't jumped on board on that. However, I would say if he can put the proof in the pudding, so to speak, I would be one of the first people, and I think most people in the Game Commission would be one of the first people to walk up and shake his hand and say, like, amazing. You know, that's what we want.
Yeah.
Let's figure out now how do we implicate this across the state, you know? So that's the next step, you know. Even just finding a cure vaccine is great, but if you don't know how to actually apply it across an entire state, then that's the next step.
Well,
but
yeah, what do you do? Like go by and try to tag each deer individually and figure out which ones have been vaccinated or cured already, or
I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do. If we would figure that out, it would just have to figure out how to get it in that form. There's sometimes, like with rabies and stuff in some states, they like airdrop vaccines, things like that. You can do stuff like that.
Like an airborne vaccine that like they'll inhale and it'll
drop it.
Really?
They put stuff in feed.
Okay,
things like that,
that's
so
not
animals
bad.
can come up to bait piles and eat it. But we're not there yet. So that's the main thing. I will say that there are a lot of universities and just research out there that their primary focus is CWD, and their primary focus, or just TSC diseases, and their primary focus is to try and find a cure or vaccine for this. Now, one of the things that I think is good to mention, because this is something that's a common misconception, is that the Pennsylvania Game Commission, okay, our job is to manage and protect Pennsylvania's wild birds, mammals, and their habitats for today and for future generations. That's literally our mission. So we are not necessarily the researchers. We do research, but our job is to take what our experts and our researchers learn and know and implement it on the ground. We are the boots on the ground, so to speak. So that's a really common misconception. We get a lot of, I do, when I go and do public programs, I get a lot of questions. Well, why aren't you finding a cure? Why aren't you, as the Game Commission, doing better? You know, why aren't you doing more research? And
why aren't you giving us more money?
Yeah. You know, it's kind of like we would like to, we don't have that. We don't have those expertise. We just don't have it. So this past year, we actually created a partnership with Penn Vet, where we are funding and helping to create an initiative called the Pennsylvania Wildlife Futures Program. and it's going to dedicate 12 disease specialists to managing and fighting wildlife diseases in the state. So,
oh wow,
the,
that's awesome.
yes,
That's
the goal
awesome.
is research. Is starting to
Yeah.
be able to do research on wildlife diseases that are affecting species in Pennsylvania. So this is huge. Like this is something we haven't
It's
like
game
done
changing.
before.
You've never
Yeah.
had- yeah. You just
No
said
pun
it,
intended.
Yeah.
oh my god. Yeah, it's not something you've never done before, and I'm sure that's the beginning of many things you're going to do to fight off this disease. Because I mean, there's an actual threat of eradicating the population of deer from chronic wasting disease. Am I correct?
Yes. So a lot of people. Well, I shouldn't say. I don't know if it's really a threat. It's just people are really afraid that that's what's going to happen,
Mhm.
and CWD is actually a very slow-moving disease.
Mm-hmm.
Very slow, and naturally spreading through a population, it's gonna build over time. And like we said, it kind of has the exponential curve, so it's gonna
Mhm.
start out slow and then increase more.
Mm-hmm.
And it tends to spread out of this like centralized point where that first infection was found and spreads outwards. And so, yes, it can have a significant effect on deer populations over time. Right now, we're actually really fortunate in the state because we're at that low level right now.
Okay.
Oh wow.
So we're actually really fortunate. There are places, kind of like the original area where CWD was found in Wisconsin.
Mhm.
They originally found CWD in 2002, and it kind of shaked the eastern part of the United States, kind of snapped us into reality because before it was just something that like Wisconsin and Colorado had.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it showed right at the Mississippi. And we're like, oh, it's coming this way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's coming this way. So, and it jumped. It wasn't like you can't see like a natural spread through the wild population from Wyoming, Colorado to Wisconsin. It like jumped states. So that was kind of concerning.
Yeah.
And like with this all happening, this spread and everything, it kind of snapped all of us into reality. We need to start preparing for this. We need to start, so 2002 till now, they recently started reporting that in that initial infection area that they had, they're reporting that 50% of their adult bucks are infected with chronic wasting disease and 30% of their adult does are infected.
Whoa.
My God.
And every single one of those deer will die.
That's insane. I didn't know it was that bad in places like other places. Wow. I'm a little taken back by that.
So I'm gonna go off on my wild card, angle, because I don't know, people say I'm the wild card on the show, but like I'm gonna go down the rabbit hole, be the wild card.
Going
So
down
let's
the
just say-
rabbit hole.
Going down. Let's say hypothetically, the deer population gets eradicated, right? Like, it's done. Chronic wasting disease wins. I'm willing to bet, without being a conspiracy theorist or anything, but like I'm willing to bet that we have the genetic makeup and we have the resources to be like, well, we just made deer again, so
that
here we go.
That or we would like find two that be like the Adam and Eve of deer.
Exactly. So I mean, there would be like, I don't feel like that's with the technology and the medical research we have like now, and this, I don't feel like that's so far fetched of a thing. Which like, okay, yeah, the deer got eradicated, so like natural deer died. Well, that sucks. Like, and now I'm not downplaying
Here's deer
the reality.
2.0.
Yeah,
Nothing
exactly. Here's
nothing
deer
smaller
2.0.
than nothing smaller than an
Immune.
8 point.
Immune to CWD, yeah, it has 12 points minimum. It's like every hunter's dream. But like, I don't feel like that's very far fetched. Am I in your world of expertise? I mean, do you think that's something that is realistic, or maybe not like absolutely realistic, but you see where I'm going with this, the premise that I'm getting at?
I mean, we can clone sheep and things like that, but we
Can
don't.
we really?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
dude. There's literally a service
What?
that you can go to the website. You can send them for I think it's 12,000 for a cat, and I think it's 40 or 50,000 for a dog. They will clone your pet.
Wait, you're telling me I can get my cat cloned for
Yes,
12,000?
100%. It's a company in China,
So,
and you are legally
Danny-
allowed to pay them.
If
Danny
I dig
just-
up my childhood cat
Yes.
and I send them,
Yep.
you mean I could
Yep.
have Pancho Nacho the Hunter Garcia 2.0 back?
Yes, you can.
Danny
for
just
$50,000.
Danny just realized there's a whole world out there.
Are you serious?
I swear to God, man, it's there. It's a real thing. It's a company.
I don't think we're gonna do that with the wild deer population, though. I'm just throwing that out there.
So I am being a little far-fetched by thinking that.
Yeah, I mean, there are tons of species that have been out there that have gone extinct, and we're not bringing them back. So,
but are those other species, like, do they have such an impact on humanity as deer? I mean, like you said, deer is such a deeply rooted thing. If they just stopped being a thing, I feel like there would be enough outrage and enough outcry to kind of justify this is the one. Like, yeah, we want you to make them again.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's like maybe not your topic of expertise. I apologize.
Yeah.
But
So you have containment areas, or is maybe that's not the right word to use.
We use them. We call it disease management areas, is what we call them.
Okay, so there's the disease management areas, and then is there also like a
took the question right out of my head.
Yeah, like
is there an exact opposite? Is there like a haven area?
Yeah,
is
that's
there like a safe
like
area?
a refuge.
Yes, exactly.
Like, I can't even think of the right word. Like, is there a farm for like good deer? I don't know.
You're a good boy.
Okay, so the general public understands this. So all a disease management area is basically we draw lines on a map. We usually use roadways or riverways, things that are easily identifiable, and then we say within this area you can't do X things. Okay, so one of those things, so general public knows, is feeding wild deer.
Mm-hmm.
Just so you know. So if you're somebody who feeds wild deer and you're in a disease management area, that's a no-no. Don't do that. You can get in trouble for it. So, like, pretty much all of Franklin County, I'm just trying to think of the areas. We're going to have Franklin County, Perry County, Juniata County, parts of Snyder, Mifflin. You're in a disease management area.
Whoa. I was just in Franklin County earlier today. Wow.
I'm just letting people know because I know a lot of people don't know.
Yeah. And so what are the repercussions for that? Just like a fine or?
You'll probably get a warning first.
Mm-hmm.
But if you continually do it, yeah, you'll get a fine for it.
Now, with like deer, are like those salt block things, or do people put those out for deer, and are those like a no-no now?
Yes, it's considered feeding.
Okay.
So it's under that same
because they just lick it.
regulation.
That's like a easy way. Now, I wanted to ask earlier when we were talking about like how the deer contract it, and you said it goes through like contact and then like through like saliva, urine, and feces. If a infected deer were to defecate on the ground and an uninfected deer walked through it, would they contract it then through their feet?
No, probably not through their feet. When we're talking
about
be like
so easy to spread,
more like direct contact, as in like if saliva, so nose touches, licking each other, those type of behaviors.
Okay.
So there is a possibility that if the soil is infected and a deer is eating the food, the plants that are right on that soil, and it comes into contact with that, it could become infected.
So they eat like off the same branch of berries, or
that's insane.
Wow.
Like, how are you even supposed to track that? Like, how are you? Yeah, it's like it sounds stupid, but it's like it's straight out of science fiction. It's like literally, for the deer, this is like the plague. Like, if you think about it, like human wise, if you put like deer in like a human, as like this is the plague. Like it's an epidemic for them.
This is the.
I wanted to say. You mean like coronavirus?
I was just going to say that. Just say it's coronavirus for deer. Oh, actually, that reminds me. Another question I had. So
about coronavirus? I don't know about
that.
No,
not coronavirus. So how I learned about CWD was through Hunter, and who you don't know, but you know who I'm talking about. Because we were talking about coronavirus. So I had never heard of CWD until probably a few weeks ago, 6 weeks ago or something like that. And it seems like it's becoming a bigger topic, even though it's been in Pennsylvania since 2012. Do you know what is recently making it blow up? Is it because of people like you?
It's me.
Yeah?
I mean, so previously the Pennsylvania Game Commission has relied a lot on game wardens and just regular staff. I was going to say they're not regular. They're awesome. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just everyday staff to take it upon themselves to also educate the public about chronic wasting disease. They already have 40 million other things that they need to be doing, and we're throwing on top of it the task of CWD. So I came in, like I said, about 2 years ago, and I am the first CWD communication specialist for the Pennsylvania Game Commission.
Oh.
So They brought me on because they knew we needed to get more communications out. We needed to do better on outreach. And that was my sole job. I didn't work with anything else. Chronic wasting disease is the only thing. Well, actually, my position is open right now if you would like to.
No. I'm curious. It's like, man, how did you? You're like, hey, I want to be the first.
What is your background in? How did you get into all of this, if you don't mind me asking?
So I have a master's degree in it's basically biology, but with a focus in wildlife from Shippensburg University.
Whoa.
Yeah, and
From
from there, I taught for like a semester at Penn State Du Bois as an adjunct. And when I was there, one of the classes that I taught was had a very heavy focus. About half the semester was focused on wildlife diseases, and teaching our up-and-coming biologists about wildlife diseases. And then I went from there, and I worked with elk in Benazet. I was actually the head of education at the Elk Country Visitor Center, and then got the job at the Game Commission. So
it actually all adds up pretty well.
Yeah.
Like, it makes sense as to why she is who she is.
Did you always want to work for the Game Commission, or was this just kind of like, whoa, this is actually a good idea, let's do this? Like, or was this like a childhood dream of yours?
no.
We'll pay off your
It's
student
kind of a funny story. I did rodeo in high school, and I was always like, I'm just going to become like a professional barrel horse trainer or something like that.
Okay.
And love you, Mom, if you're listening. But she was like, listen, you need to do more than just go to school for horses. She's like, okay, you got to do something. And me being the brat that I am, I was like, you know what? I'm going to show her. She's like, if you get an associate's degree in anything, I'll send you to any horse school in the country. I was like, deal. She goes, I'll pay for your first semester. I'm like, deal. So I'm like, what is the most ridiculous sounding degree I can get out there? And I found wildlife technology at Penn State Du Bois. And I was like, cool. I like being outdoors. I like hunting. This will be like at least like an easy 2 years. And I got into it, absolutely loved it. And probably before the end of my first semester there, I was already planning on getting a bachelor's degree. And then after getting close to the end of my bachelor's degree, it's like, you know, if I really want to be a biologist, if this is really what I want to do, I need to get a master's degree. And it just kept like spreading from there. So her trick worked.
Wow.
Oh, that's great. Don't you just love how moms can like manipulate you like that
just
too?
know.
It worked. She got what she wanted.
She did. Next thing you know.
So when are you buying horses though?
I don't. My one barrel horse passed this past year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
it's
sorry.
okay. It's okay. It happens.
I was trying to
God
make
damn
it
it.
funny.
No. And my other horse that I had, I actually sold him to a kid for 4-H. So.
Oh,
What? That's
Yeah.
cool.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Well, this has been like, I feel like we did like a really fun PBS special.
I know. Like, I can't believe how much information we've just taken in
It's a
in
lot.
the last. I don't even think it's been an hour. And wow.
And 2 episodes ago, I got mad at a pineapple. Like
You did. You
I did. I was mad. It's not a pine or an apple. So
and you threw it in the
I
trash
threw it
can.
in the trash can.
Wow.
We're
I'm just
growing up.
trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, we just covered so much information. Oh my gosh. And I definitely want to have you back on here to talk about
For
more
sure.
of this sometime. So
My-
we are. No, you first. Go ahead.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
My question for you is for the viewers: if people liked what they heard, people are interested in what they heard, where can they go? What can they find? Where can they find the research to do this on their own?
So we have a ton of information on the Pennsylvania Game Commission webpage.
Okay.
It's a little confusing, but just type in Pennsylvania Game Commission into Google.
Mm-hmm.
Click the first website. I'm sure it'll be the first one that pops up.
Hopefully.
There's actually a search bar on the upper right-hand corner. Type in chronic wasting disease.
Okay.
You can find other links on our page for it, but that's really like just search it. It's easier. We also, if you just want to talk to somebody like me who knows about chronic wasting disease, we actually have a hotline number. So that is 1-833-INFO-CWD.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have a email, and that's info.cwd@pa.gov. So you can just send us your questions and we'll talk to you.
All right.
That is super simple.
Yeah, and actually, I have the website up right now, what you sent me, and like once you get into the chronic wasting disease page, there's just like a whole grocery list of just different resources on the side as well.
Wow.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, like, and it's everything down to, CWD public events, response plan, updates, test results, down to debunking myths, webinars, short video, all sorts of information. So that's where I did most of my research before this episode because I wanted to learn more about it. So I wasn't like completely in the dark, but
I would say like there are some people who are like skeptical of going to our webpage because we're a government agency, and if you're one of those people, there is another organization out there. They're a nonprofit. They're called the CWD Alliance, and they primarily just post research papers and new up and coming information. They post the facts. So if you want information from a different resource, that's who I would go to.
Okay.
And links will also be on our webpage as well. I'll just take whatever you send me. We'll put it on our website, darkwithdaniel.com. So did you have anything you want to add before we wrap this up tonight or anything?
No, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming out. I mean,
you.
seriously, volunteering to come out here and talk about this is huge. It's a very important thing for our wildlife, whether you're a hunter or just animal lover or anything. It's huge. And, I mean, like I said, I just learned about this 6 weeks ago, and now I'm like, blown away. I've never heard of this before, and it's been it literally started in the county I grew up in 2012 while I still lived there. I mean, that's absolutely insane to me. So, but thank you so much once again for coming on, and we'll have you back on for sure to talk about it more sometime. So, also, real quick, shout out to Rockmill Industries for sponsoring our podcast. If you want to check them out, go to rockmillinc.com, INK, for professional recording, stuff like this, screen printing, embroidery, and whatnot. And then also don't forget to check out the PA Game Commission website as well to learn more about CWD. All right?
Sounds good.
All right, everybody have a good night.